everyone. Is that too loud? It is too loud, a little bit too loud, thank you. Okay, so my name is Jody Skipper, welcome. I'm on the faculty in anthropology and Southern Studies here, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Alex Chapman's talk, which is one feature of the Center for the Study of Southern Culture's South Talk series. And I just want to announce that it's made possible by the generous support of the Phil Hardin Foundation, and that we'll be having another talk next Thursday, same time, 5:30 p.m., featuring journalism professor Mark Dolan's photography exhibition, Portraits in Place, Images of Those for Whom Place is Not Just Where, but Who They Are. For this reception and gallery walk, Dolan will discuss how a personal project to record his mother's memories of growing up in New Orleans, another New Orleans talk, expanded to include much more. The project's aim is to honor people and their strong connection to the places they live, and we hope that you can attend. So now, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Alex Chapman, an assistant professor of African American Studies at Emory University. Dr. Chapman is a cultural anthropologist who teaches and conducts research on sex and gender in the African diaspora, music studies, and structural violence. His work is grounded in performance ethnography, which he uses to employ musicianship, dance, and performance art to create immersive accounts of lived experience. Prior to his time at Emory, he received a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin and served on the faculty in women's studies at Spelman College, where he held the first tenure-track appointment dedicated to Black queer studies at an HBCU. He's here tonight to talk about his forthcoming book, Raising the Bottom, Bounce Music in Black Queer Performance in Post-Katrina New Orleans. Welcome, Dr. Chapman.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. I was here 12 years ago for a symposium on Southern Studies, and it's nice to be back. Thank you to the Center for the Study of Southern Cultures. Thank you so much to Afton Thomas for just communicating so well and through I studied disaster, so it sounds like y'all went through one here. As I was driving in, I saw all the broken trees and limbs and things, and I've heard some people still don't even have electricity, so I'm glad that people, whatever you have going on, made time to come here today. All right, so let's get into it. It's a good amount of sound. I'm close enough. All right. Gig on Bourbon Street. I was performing with Vakari Du and the Crew, a group of local artists who gained popular appeal through the commercial phenomenon of Sissy Bounce, a fast-paced Black queer offshoot of the larger New Orleans bounce music scene. Bounce music, like Vaka and most of the group, came from the city's public housing projects and their surrounding neighborhoods. Indeed, many listeners have referred to bounce as project music. For a few months, I'd been working with Sissy Bounce artists as a dancer, manager, and DJ, cueing pre-recorded tracks they would rap, sing, and twerk to. As we stopped to sit on a stoop and figure out our next move, it felt like a good time to switch hats and move from performer to anthropologist. I pulled out my recorder to do an interview, hoping to capture what was on everyone's mind. Vaka, the principal leader of the group, went first, saying, quote, "The Magnolia itself was the beginning of everything. It really was the best project ever, not just because I'm from there and you know Uptown is the best. Like Uptown, how's that sound?" Unquote. Vaka continued to reminisce about his past in the Magnolia neighborhood, saying daily life was like me and a bunch of Black women walking the streets, the PNC, Clara Street to the Callio and the Melf. Now that was the dirtiest project, but it's just like Uptown hoes. I was supposed to be the first sissy of Cash Money, but I didn't like that word ever since then. That's what they used to say. Sissy, a contested term some artists embraced and others rejected. It is often used locally as a catch-all for Black subjects who live outside masculine expectations. It is generally directed at gay men and trans women. Cash Money Records, the music label that launched hip-hop stars like Drake, Nicki Minaj and Lil Wayne began in New Orleans, and in its earliest days, it showcased bounce acts. Raising the Bottom is a performance ethnography where for over 2 years I examined everyday life from the stage and the moments in between each show, while situating bounce and its surrounding culture historically and globally. My research required paying attention to community members and cultural practices marginalized not only by race and sexuality, but also class disparities within Black communities. I conducted the ethnographic portion of this research focusing on my time with Valkyrie Du and the crew between 2010 and 2012. Sissy Bounce helped define more inclusive notions of Black belonging in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. That disaster had caused the mass displacement of Black New Orleans and led to a radical shift in neoliberal governance. Why and how, I wonder, did a Black queer performance genre from the projects come to represent home and kinship for the broader Black community in a time of crisis? Although commercial interest in Sissy Bounce peaked around 2015, its reach can't be taken for granted. Sissy Bounce increased Black, queer, and trans people's visibility in mainstream social media, dance culture, and hip-hop throughout the 2010s. Its traces can still be seen where someone's twerking, face down and ass up on the dance floor, when a song samples Bounce's unique rhythms and voices, and when contemporary Black queer representations combine equal parts urbanness and southernness. The popularity of Bounce artists both within and outside of New Orleans reveals that their lives are far more broadly significant than at first appearance. As Black queer Southern performers, they've played a key role in defining alternative notions of Black power and liberation. Their lives and the culture that fostered them also challenge dominant assumptions that Black kinship, home, and community are inherently homophobic, transphobic, and anti-queer. All right. So what is Bounce? I'm gonna play some. All right.
The rhymes you are about to hear are true. MC's names have been changed to protect the innocent.
All right. Bounce has nationally been characterized as an underground form of hip-hop comparable to other regional forms like go-go in Washington, D.C., chop and screw in Houston, hyphy from the Bay Area. Locally, Bounce is understood as a primary genre rather than underground music. You can hear it on the radio, pouring out of clubs and bars throughout the city. Bounce represents a particular sound you hear in this recording called the brown beat and the trigger man. These rhythms originated in the South Bronx and migrated to New Orleans in the early 1990s. The Showboys drag rap is a play on the radio and motion picture franchise Dragnet about Los Angeles police and criminality. In New Orleans, the combination of this rhythm is referred to as that beat, a defining sound in the formation of local identity and what music scholar and filmmaker Matt Miller describes as, in particular, mid-tempo rhythmic feel created by propulsive, syncopated bass drum pattern in combination with layered continuous percussive elements such as hand claps or simple melodic lines and often featuring particular sounds sampled from other recordings. Miller goes on to discuss the ubiquity of Bounce's rhythm, or as locals call it, that beat, as a defining sound in the formation of local identity and a beacon calling the city's dispersed Black population home. Many performers and audience members say that a Bounce song cannot be made without this rhythm. There were initially 3 waves of Bounce music defined by gendered and sexual stratification. The first wave included artists like Kevin MCT Tucker and Urban DJ Irv, Phillips' song Where They At from 1992. It was the first popular Bounce song that combined its signature rhythm with lyrics that directly referenced racial politics, resistance to police, and braggadocious sexual lyrics reminiscent of vernacular traditions like the Dozens. The second wave was defined by Black women rappers like Mia X, Lady Red, Cheeky Black, Miss T, and Magnolia Shorty, who provided a counter-discourse to heteromasculine narratives. In the late 1990s, Valkyrie Du and Katie Red stepped onto the scene and were labeled sissy rappers for their expression of Black, queer, and trans subjectivity. Over 30 years, more and more local artists would emerge as dancers, rappers, and producers, leading to a robust economy, including clubs and record labels. The most popular and well-known artist to come out of the local scene is Big Freedia, whose music and reality show, Big Freedia Queen of Bounce, opened even more of the world up to bounce music. As we will see, Black women and queer people in the post-Katrina bounce scene have maintained a strong foothold in the genre. The various streams of bounce music would work collectively toward providing alternative narratives about working class life within Black New Orleans, especially those communities with roots in public housing projects. The impact of Hurricane Katrina and the breaking of the levees would lead to a rupture in the progression of the genre, as well as the mass displacement of public housing communities. In the wake of the storm, performances like those of Valkyrie Du and the Crew would figure centrally in calling community members back home. In the midst of extreme urban shifts, these performances would help define more inclusive notions of Black belonging amid the ongoing conditions of anti-Black dispossession and displacement. Big Freedia, named Freddie Ross, is a gender non-conforming gay-identified rapper using both he, him, and she, her pronouns. Freedia has done more to popularize bounce beyond New Orleans than any of her peers, and I owe her a great debt for introducing me to the bounce stage, and later to Valkyrie Du and the Crew. Prior to this research, I was a musician and performance artist active in the US and abroad throughout the 2000s. Aware of my background and scholarly interest in Black queer culture, Big Freedia's manager contacted me about performing as a backup dancer for her. I joined her on her first tour at the 2008 South by Southwest Music Festival in Austin, Texas. Although I'd seen Freedia at a few parades in New Orleans and was familiar with her music, I wasn't prepared for how generous, humble, and dynamic a presence she was. Only hours after we met, I took to the stage with her, and her own larger-than-life spirit emboldened me. So this is me on the left. The first time I performed with Big Freedia, and then on the right, I'm in the background DJing for Valkyrie Du and the Crew. Later that same year, I attended a Big Freedia show in the French Quarter. It was where I first met Valkyrie Du and the Crew. After describing my goals and interest in their group, I was asked to participate in rehearsals and shows very quickly, and my enthusiastic participation was also a means of securing research data. Group members would introduce me to people saying, "He's our historian," owning the fact that they stood, or should I say were dancing, at the center of a significant historical moment. Once I started meeting everyone in the group for rehearsals, I realized I was out of my league. I was 5 to 10 years older than everyone, and keeping up was a challenge. But I was determined to make myself useful, not just as a participant observer, but as a contributor. Early on, I understood that deconstruction and scholarly engagement alone cannot account for embodied meanings that are accessible through ethnographic methods of radical empiricism. Group members took me into their homes, to their families, their churches, giving me opportunities to see the spectacular and the everyday aspects of their lives. Through them, I began to experience the Black queer club scene, which played bounce music almost exclusively. I went to church revivals, birthdays, funerals, and other gatherings. At private homes, block parties, and bars, I increasingly was surrounded by the group's extended community of friends and fans. My preliminary research began in the fall of 2006 with frequent short trips to New Orleans. I began making connections with performers in 2008. I conducted primary fieldwork and interviews of at least 60 community members between 2009 and 2011. During these years, I met and performed with Valkyrie Du and the Crew, Big Freedia, Sissy Nobi, Katie Red, and many others. I continued to follow the careers of particular artists throughout the 2010s. After 2011, my attention shifted from fieldwork to Sissy Bounce's movement into national and international circulation of pop culture and social media. Beyond my focus on performance ethnography, I use media and musicological analysis in 3 areas. Tracing Big Freedia's career, which led to greater national and international interest in the genre, the annexation and circulation of Sissy Bounce and attendant representations of New Orleans in popular culture through the 2010s, particularly in the music and performances of Beyonce and Drake and Miley Cyrus, and in Sissy Bounce's, in just in general, the mainstreaming of twerk. So in the book, each chapter follows a similar organizational structure. The ethnographic context of my co-performances with Baca and the crew and other Blackwood figures foregrounds each chapter. Music lyrics, excerpts, and/or footnotes engage additional artistic and scholarly voices in order to develop and deepen my analysis. Members and former members of the crew, as well as their friends and family members, share oral histories and self-understandings beyond the ethnographic vignettes. I situate the local and everyday within larger historical and global networks. The ethnographic accounts and the voices of Blackwood people are what shine and are privileged, as this is the goal of Raising the Bottom. Many of Vaca's lyrics spoke to friendships and just hanging out and just walking the streets of New Orleans. The lyrics to one of his early songs goes, "Fresh ideas, fresh face to the world, easy, breezy, beautiful Avenue girls. Come on, Avenue girls, diamonds and pearls, Avenue girls, diamonds and pearls, make the titties twirl." Avenue Girls, 2 Gs, recorded when Baca was a teen in the 90s, playfully remixes the easy, breezy, and beautiful CoverGirl jingle, redefining feminine beauty and sexuality in the everyday life of ghettoized Black youth. The song's background vocals were delivered by some of the young women he'd walked those streets with. Many of them had since been displaced, along with a great deal of the public housing community he'd grown up with, through a confluence of social welfare reform and the mass displacement of the community due to Hurricane Katrina. The song is just one example of the ways bounce music redirects common hierarchies of value in an effort to sustain what's been cast to the bottom of social hierarchies. Toni Morrison's novel Sula and its fictional Black neighborhood, The Bottom, feel especially relevant in situating Black queer performances of bounce. Sula's account of the people and the geography of the Bottom is a blueprint. It brings what Black feminist scholar Barbara Christian referred to as the felt knowledge of Black life into contrast with the real, self-evident yet constructed mapping of spaces. Raising the Bottom traces the structure of what I call an epistemology of the bottom, the mediation of binary logics that produce and maintain systems of devaluation as they conflate Black and queer bodies, space, and sex with the bottom of social hierarchies. I insist on rethinking who is an authority as we rank knowledge from clergy, doctors, academics, artists, musicians, and dancers. If hospitals, churches, and universities are formal social institutions that attend to the former, how can we conceive of the stage, nightclubs, and the street as informal equivalents of the latter? This epistemology of the bottom is a toolkit for deconstructing commonly held notions around bottom locations, whether those locations are geographic or embodied, for instance, Black queer vernacular, public housing projects, the body's own physical bottom, and deviant stereotypes of the sissy. Raising the Bottom will highlight the ways performers have taken these and other stereotypes and their everyday effects, remixed them, and redirected the result into more access and resources for Black queer people and their extended communities. Next, I'd like to play a track and review some lyrics from one of the songs I performed regularly with Baca and the crew. Part of the excitement of researching and performing with Baca and the crew was learning about the shifting landscape of New Orleans through the music. In songs like Roll Call, we hear specific community members represented along with the schools, projects, and streets across the city. You see him at the club, that's your boy, that's your trade. They want them hot boys back at town, Roshan Blade. Roshan Blade is a street thoroughfare that a lot of people would party and walk through. Cali, yo, the Calio projects. Front of town, back of town, by the tree, Cocoa, Nutty, and Pee Wee, Brosad, Wild Will, those are schools. In the song we hear Baca referencing a place called Back of Town also. An imagined site of blackness with deep historical connections to African diasporic genealogies. Bounce is an inherently social form, a dialogue and relationship between artists, DJs, and audiences that allow them to produce and memorialize spaces, places, and community through song. The songs represent itineraries and geographies in a manner that's akin to other local performances of parading and procession, avoiding the reductive ways identity and place appear in dominant mappings of the city defined by tourism and plantocracy. So the original city of New Orleans, as many know, is also called the Crescent City. Where it says French Quarter right there, you might see. French Quarter being the original colony. But the line that's just behind it was the dividing line between front of town, the French Quarter, and back of town. And back of town, I've noticed through my work, comes up in colonial mappings of the city. Louis Armstrong would talk about back of town blues, and it comes up in Bounce music. I noticed that there's a kind of particular way in which this thing may hit. When we performed Roll Call, our calls and responses were only a means of building energy and connection. They also made people feel represented and proud of where they came from. Call and response certainly isn't specific to bounce music, but bounce's use of the form to focus on places and people that in some cases no longer exist animates a process of memory making and strengthens those representations' capacity to generate feelings of home. In Baca's songs, Back of Town was a familiar refrain that held deep meaning for audiences. Bounce performers in their generation often used the term to refer to Calio projects, a location that was itself divided into a front of town and back of town. Historically, though, back of town more generally represented what I call geographic bottoms, usually flood-prone, less habitable land where Black and poor communities have been pushed. This designation existed in contrast to front of town spaces that usually existed on higher, more valued ground. The original colony of New Orleans was situated in what would eventually become the French Quarter. Referred to as the Crescent City, it hugged the higher ground close to the river before receiving its official name. The Faubourg Treme neighborhood, one of the first communities of freed Blacks in the nation, was called Back of Town. It was built just beyond the French Quarter at the time of the city proper. Back of Town also held Congo Square, where under French and Spanish colonial rule, enslaved Africans from West Africa and the Caribbean and African Americans who had already existed in New Orleans for generations gathered on Sunday afternoons to sing and dance, performing and producing culture within the confines of plantocracy. Later, a portion of the Treme would become Storyville, the birthplace of jazz and a hub of both sexual vice within the South. There's a vast communal investment in both the concept of Back of Town and the memories it evokes. The phrase pops up across descriptions of Black New Orleans over 200 years. It appears in colonial historical accounts, mid-20th century blues and jazz, as well as bounce and hip hop. As a trope, Back of Town transcends any specific location. It has long served as a poetics of landscape, returning communities to bottom geographies, locations defined by racial, economic, and sexual difference. In the original recording, each of Baca's calls are applied to by the members of the crew, which at the time was made up of his teenage friends, a group of young women he also called the Half Girls. At the end of the track, their names are shouted out. To break it down, you have a dialogue between a teenage queer man and straight and trans women about their daily lives. Note that more nationally recognized sites of tourism and other forms of capitalist consumption associated with Bourbon Street and the French Quarter are not mentioned in songs like Roll Call. Baca said of his friends, they were self-built women, fashionistas, and entrepreneurs, and most of all, they survived it. I asked Baca if he'd left New Orleans because of Katrina, and he responded in the following way. No, he said, we received notice that the project, Magnolia, was being torn down. Everybody received notice they were tearing it down to rebuild it, and that they made it possible. They made people an offer to move back. They were taking it down to rebuild it, but we knew it was the government and how they wanted to make the area white and soon. Even though they rebuilt it up nice, people are still waiting and don't have a home. Some went to Houston, but Houston messed up a lot of people, particularly after Katrina. Some people still don't have a place to stay. If you couldn't fulfill your lease and you were on Section 8 and the lease was broke, you'd have no place to stay. They wanted Washington Avenue from St. Charles all the way to Claiborne to be white. I knew I was going to miss everybody. We had to travel to see each other. It was crazy, those were my girls. We grew up together. But by that time, I felt like the world was about to change. Baca describes the multiple displacements of project tenants in New Orleans done via changes in public housing policy during the 1990s and after due to Hurricane Katrina. He also recalls those displacements' impact on close relationships he had as a young gay black man with young black women. Beginning in the mid-1970s, long before Katrina, city planners focused on a problematizing narrative that centered blighted housing, broken infrastructure, and ideas of black deviance. This narrative focused on how to remove low-income communities using federal and state public resources to partner with private business. The goal was a market-driven response to public housing. In New Orleans, representations of blighted housing, uninhabitable space, and broken infrastructure were paired with ideas of black deviance, a combination traceable to a political economy of exclusion that spread across major cities. The assumption that market-driven development could respond to poverty better than federal urban aid was part of a narrative that also blamed low-income black communities for not securing middle-class status in the wake of civil rights legislation. This backlash to the gains of the civil rights era was also a means of scapegoating marginalized communities for an ongoing fiscal crisis, while compelling communities of color into a growing culture of militarism and policing at home and abroad. Bacatown is a place where deviance, transgression, and sex are thought to preoccupy all of its inhabitants. It's where the juke joint used to be and where blackness was appreciated on its own. It represents places produced through oppression, where people nonetheless make the best of a bad situation and hold on to what they have. That Magnolia and New Orleans may not be places people can fully possess, but they can be actively imagined and reconceived through the music. On February 21st, 1819, Benjamin Henry Latrobe, the influential Anglo-American architect whose designs were used as the basis for New Orleans waterworks, went for a stroll. Crossing the boundary of the French Quarter into the original Bacatown, his diaries and sketches provide some of the fullest accounts of the performances that occurred there. Quote, in going up St. Peter's Street and approaching the Common, I heard a most extraordinary noise, which I supposed to proceed from some horse mill, the horses trampling on a wooden floor. I found, however, on emerging from the houses onto the Common, that it proceeded from a crowd of 500 or 600 persons, assembled in an open space or public square. I went to the spot and crowded near enough to see the performance. All those who were engaged in the business seemed to be blacks. I did not observe a dozen yellow faces. They made an incredible noise. A man sung an uncouth song to the dancing, and the women screamed a detestable burthen on one single note. I have never seen anything more brutally savage, at the same time dull and stupid, than this whole exhibition. Latrobe's conflation of blackness with non-human sounds, savageness, excess, and brutality reproduce all the primary associations of blackness as the bottom of social hierarchies. Latrobe died of yellow fever before he could see the completion of his work in the city, but his designs would contribute to the next 150 years of urban expansion. As New Orleans grew, Congo Square and Bacatown was integrated within the city limits. But as performance studies scholar and historian Joseph Roach notes, quote, the liminal character of the market remained, end quote. Latrobe's designs in which groundwater was pumped out of swamps and floodplains allowed the Crescent City to expand and civic life to flourish. However, the downside of pumping and drainage is anthropogenic subsidence. The human-assisted sinking and compaction of mud and soil over time has produced what we now know as the bottom of the bowl. Hearing things prompted Latrobe's passage from the city proper to back of town, a place where his European colonial self might succumb to the wilds of blackness and the environmental conditions of the swamp. As sound studies scholar Anna Maria Ochoa Gautier writes, quote, the presence or absence of sound stands as the very mediator of the presence or absence of life, showing us how myths or cosmologies can tie events into structures. But the acknowledgement of such a relation, based as it is on admitting the agentive acoustic dimensions of non-human entities in the affairs of humans, is largely based on an understanding of the relations between humans and non-humans that unsettles the historical constructed boundaries between nature and culture, the human and the non-human, end quote. Latrobe crosses what he imagines as a threshold between humanity and the non-human wild, prompted by his perceiving something outside Western notions of legibility and civility. According to architectural historian Del Upton, Latrobe's experience spoke to pervasive anxieties about the influence of Black music and urban governance in the city. Quote, structure and harmony, measure and control, as well as content coherence were indispensable signs of musicality and of humanity itself. By implication, Black music threatened to undermine socialization and morality. Black dance demonstrated the reality of the threat. Indeed, to white authorities, all Black vocal expression was noise that disturbed citizens, undermined order, and needed to be regulated. In limiting the right of slaves to gather and be heard in New Orleans in 1817, the council also forbade, quote, whooping or hollowing anywhere in the city or suburbs, or making any clamorous noise or singing aloud any indecent song, end quote. These historical tensions reveal sound and music as intangible markers of life and death, humanity and non-humanity in the expansion of urban space. Given past and present efforts to discipline Black bodies along these lines, it's vital to consider the stakes in reproducing Black sound against efforts to silence it. Efforts to regulate Black expression of culture and desire were not simply a matter of public life, but a struggle over the normalization of race, sexuality, and gender in the private sphere. Ghettoized, subsided land is often conflated with the Black bodies that exist in them, and bottom spaces and inhabitants are seen as active threats to civic life. Black music and performance, whether in Congress Square, New Orleans blues, and Baca Reduce work, are creative mediations of systemically produced bottoms. These cultural forms are strategies born out of the geographic and ecological circumstances of being prefigured as non-human property, objects that are part of the environment. So, how am I doing on time? Doing good? Okay. So I was so worried about time, I started trying to cut my talk. I was like, I can't show any more videos, but I'm just gonna have to go off the cuff a little bit here. So, years after kind of Cincy Bounce has its peak, I start to see it enter pop culture. Miley Cyrus's little twerking performance. Even before that, you had Nicki Minaj and what's his name from Detroit? Ass. Yeah. There's like all these little things that I'm starting to notice happening in popular culture. And then eventually we get to Beyonce and Drake. And I want to talk about Drake in particular. So in 2018, Drake released a song called In My Feelings. And it happens in New Orleans, and it begins with this almost like Romeo and Juliet little like skit between him and his love Kiki. And Felicia Rashad comes out and she admonishes him as like, you don't have to go home, but you gotta get the hell out of here, you're like your little boy. And so it's very pastoral in a way. But it sets up this notion that there is this obstacle to him fulfilling his love. And then it cuts to a lot of ratchetry, I'd say. And this is where we got I believe, the debut of City Girls. It's just crazy to think this was so long ago. This is 2018. And in the video, the hook of the video references Backatown. So I wanna here, please no commercial, please.
But the new me is really still real me. I swear you gotta feel me before they try and kill me. Gotta make some choices. They running out of options. Cause I've been going off and they don't know when to stop. And the way you get the top and I see that you've been learning. The way I took a shot, you spend it like you earned it. And when you popped off when your ex, he deserved it. I thought you would've won from the jump that confirmed it. The track when he went. I buy you champagne, but you love some hit. From the block like you did. I know you special, girl, cause I know too many. Risha, do you love me? Are you riding? Say you never ever leave from beside me. Cause I want you, and I need you. And I'm down for you always, JT. Do you love me? Are you riding? Say you never ever leave from beside me. Cause I want you, and I need you. And I'm down for you always.
Ooh, bad bitches and we kissing in a way, kissing in a way, kissing in a way. I get black card in the cold to the state, cold to the state, cold to the state. I soon have a network, but in that bitch and chill. What's your network?
Cause I want you, and I need you. And I'm down for you always. And I'm down for you always. And I'm down for you, down for you, down for you always. Kiki, do you love me? Are you riding? Say you never ever leave from beside me.
Yeah, I don't have the right clip right here, but pretty much it's sampling Magnolia Shorty, who's a bounce artist. It's just like, I got a new boy in a tray, and he back in town, Palio driveway. So in the chapter Back in Town, I talk more about the relationship between this artist who died in 2010 violently, and Baca, who actually inspired Baca to start performing bounce. But I find it very interesting the way that at the end of this video, Drake gets woken up out of what he claims was a nightmare, that he was in New Orleans and there was just all these crazy people. And that he was like, it was like horrible. And that he is still the man, and that he will get the girl. This book offers a path toward reconsidering and redirecting personal and communal assumptions about good and evil, pleasure and pain, dirt and cleanliness. Readers can also make various connections between the text and debates about difference, power, and social justice. I'm of the mind that none of those topics can be engaged without first doing the undervalued labor of digging deep to observe our own unconscious biases. Anthropology presupposes an interrogation of view usually imagined as neutral and downward-looking of the world around us. That position, like many others within this book, might need to be inverted to consider what the people and stories within these pages have to say. For readers who are struggling to embrace what they've been told is unworthy and excessive in themselves, consider the acts of self-love, intentionality, and manifestation in these pages as a condition of possibility for your own capacities to define, grow, and act. Like music, dance, or language, this book won't produce better access and resources for systemically marginalized peoples in and of itself, but perhaps through playing with entrenched ideas about the how, where, what, and why power and powerlessness, we might tip the scales that undergird today's intellectual force and thereby change material conditions. Redirection as a practice of reevaluation is inherent to this work. If you ever caught your foot tapping to the beat despite what your mind tells you was cool, pleasurable, and of good taste, I encourage you to pay attention to your felt connection to the text. You could be a few steps away from raising the volume yourself, and if so, what would that mean about you